On today's episode, Ken Rosenthal takes a fat L that is nearly a work of art and going over the most miserable moments of the year in Padres baseball, featuring the hat making a little bit of a return. Lots to get into, so let's get started.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Thursday, January 11th. As always, I am your host with sometimes, occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, or you can follow me at Locked On Padres for exclusively only Padres content. If you get tired of my tweets, that's fine, at LO_Padres. And you can also check me out on YouTube, where I don't do this very often, but I felt like the genre, the topic of the show constituted it. I am wearing the clown hat that I've been using for so long that I literally think that I got just randomly at a St. Patrick's Day parade once. I think someone random person gave it to me. But anyway, guys, if you want to check that out, feel free to do so. I've also been working over at Just Baseball to write about the Padres and going to be ramping that up soon. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you by FanDuel. We love FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel. They are killing it right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 moneyline bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And to get started with today's show, look, the basis, the real core of today's episode is, for sure, the worst moments of the Padres year. And I'm excited to talk about that because I think it'll be a little bit cathartic for people. And because I was a little bit late on doing this when the new year officially came in last week. But I want to quickly talk about Ken Rosenthal and the article that came out today. And I think that it's important to talk about it, not because this is a dunk on affair, although frankly I find the phrase dunked on a little bit cringe for how much it's overused these days. I think that it's not just that. From that perspective, yes, I do not feel bad for what Ken Rosenthal is getting crap for. For those who missed it, Ken Rosenthal wrote an article in The Athletic basically giving the take that Wander Franco is a cautionary tale for teams spending on 20 or so year olds, essentially, and how that investment is risky. And I don't want to really talk about the article too much because I really think that it's pretty disgraceful in a lot of ways. It's one of the more disgraceful articles I've seen in the baseball sphere in quite a long time. I was actually texting some friends saying that I thought the magnum opus apex alpha omega work of art when it came to just baseball media cringe was the Ben Verlander article on Shohei Ohtani last year. Or I think it was before the season started, if I'm not mistaken. Basically just him finding a way, the nepotism baby that he may very well be. I don't think I need to explain to you who he's related to. For him to go out and kind of make an Ohtani article about himself was just, but it was more cringe. You know what I mean? This is just bad. And the reason I think this is bad and the reason why I think it's also relevant to this is for two reasons. Number one, it relates to what I've always said about baseball media. I've been saying this for a while now. I've been saying this literally ever since the Padres season ended, that you were going to get a lot of takes from legacy outlets. Not all of them. Let me be clear. There's great people out there. I really try to be careful when I criticize media people because I need to remind everyone, there's some super talented people out there who are doing awesome work, local writers, all that stuff. But you're going to get a lot of people like on MLB Network, and in this case, Ken Rosenthal, who allude to or flat out say things that discourage the idea of spending. And in this case, it means taking a risk on a 20-year-old and Wander Franco. Now, Wander Franco is a disgrace himself. Bigger of a disgrace than this Ken Rosenthal piece, obviously. We don't need to talk about that. He's going to be out of the league, probably in jail soon. He's a disgrace. Awful human being. Enough said. But I alluded to this before because I think it relates to that theme that I've been pressing a lot, which is that this is how you get it, right? This is This is what they do. It's too risky. You got to do this because apparently this article is almost insinuating that every 20-year-old just might be a pedophile. You know what I mean? Like that's basically where we're at right now when it comes to this take that I think is awful. And not to mention there are plenty of other young players that don't do this. So throwing everyone in one basket that's why I call the article disgraceful. And I think that it's wrong. And it's like, again, it's not the primary sentiment behind the article, which is don't spend and be risky, but it's certainly ostensibly linked to that, right? Which is that don't take a risk on the players. It's a risk. See what can happen, right? Meanwhile, Julio Rodriguez and Corbin Carroll have been awesome. You know what I mean? And Fernando Tatis Jr., which is the second part of why this is bad. So the first part is it going along with that long line of thinking and theme that I've been telling you guys and warning you that the Padres failure and the Mets failure, you're going to get a lot of people saying spending is bad, right? This is a little bit related to that. But number two, the reason aside from mocking this article and condemning it is that Fernando Tatis Jr. is mentioned and kind of brought in this same circle, which I think is why it relates, especially for my podcast today, because this is a Padres podcast. And that is abhorrent for you to even mention Fernando Tatis Jr. in the same article, in the same sentence, in the same planet as what Wander Franco did. Fernando Tatis Jr., one of the things that annoyed me with the crap that he got was he literally got more crap for what he did I'm not saying like Dodger fans or Diamondbacks, like division rivals. Division rivals will boo everybody. You know what I mean? And there's something sometimes beautiful about that. I'm talking about universally. I was at Yankee Stadium when it happened. But then other people like your Josh Donaldsons, like your Domingo Germans, like your et ceteras, Marcelo Zunas, players like that, those guys don't get booed universally in other crowds. And that's why I get annoyed with it. Because this idea that cheating at a sport is worse than inflicting harm on human beings. You know what I mean? And it just seems like fans have that energy so much for guys that cheat in baseball versus guys who do things that in the grand scheme of things are bad. I'm not saying that you can't boo Tatis. I'm just saying that, like, I've been watching football for a long time. I never saw Ben Roethlisberger get booed. You know what I mean? In divisions that weren't his own. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't see him get universally booed around the league the same way that Tatis, as just one example, was. And I could be wrong. There might be some other bad people that did get booed all around, but I'm just saying. So that's my issue with that. And I think that throwing Tatis in the middle of this is a guy who got a suspension for performance-enhancing drugs and, basically mocked for his very irresponsible motorcycle operating. To include him as like your reference point or as one of the other comparisons to make about why investing in 20-year-olds is risky is on top of everything I've said about being anti-labor, frankly, anti-labor sentiment, not to get too political, but it is. To compare that to pedophilia is just awful. And Rosenthal's take should have been the other way, if anything. I frankly wouldn't have made any take about baseball relating to Wander Franco. I would have been like, guess what? Bad dude, bad. You know what I mean? That would have been my take. But if you're going to, the take should have been like, this should not dissuade you from 20-year-olds and from young players and all that. And then maybe you can bring up Tatis and being like, these two things. Not enough, right? So I really found that distasteful and awful for you to even allude to Fernando Tatis Jr. when it comes to Wander Franco. I really did. I really did. I thought it was awful. I really did. And I think that is something that Padres fans and fans around the league, this is the type of article and take that I do believe is the type of thing to damage someone's reputation. And I frankly think that it should. You know what I mean? I really do. I really do. But, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about some sad things that are a little bit more in the grand scheme of things, especially with Wander Franco, as I've been saying. Not quite as bad, but we're talking about the most sad developments, things to happen in Padre land in this last year. It's going to be fun. It's going to be hopefully cathartic for you guys. But before we get into that, I want to talk to you guys about our friends over at, no, not FanDuel, not yet, Jace Medical. Ladies and gentlemen, I know we come to sports for an escape. I know, I get it. You know, you're working hard, you get home. You know what you want? You want some highlights, man. You want to talk baseball. You just want to talk ball with people, with friends and family, or maybe even occasionally me. I whatever. You know what I mean? Whatever. But according to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade, and that is quite scary. I can't imagine feeling more helpless. Or significant others I have that deal with health. If you are unable to get your medications, thankfully, that's okay because Jace Medical is here to help you out. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics that treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinuses, skin infections, among others. Stuff that could happen to anyone, frankly. And if you visit jacemedical.com, you just complete your, kind of physician encounter that they'll have there. You fill out a survey. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important It has never been more important than to be prepared. I cannot speak. It has never been more important to be more prepared than today. I'm struggling. Go to jacemedical.com, guys, and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. Important stuff in an important time. Go check it out. And just like that, we are back, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Locked On Padres podcast. And we're talking the fun bad, not the bad in the case of Ken Rosenthal and Wander Franco and all that stuff. But we got to talk about, in my opinion, the worst things to happen in Padre land of this last year. And it's a lot. And I think that I didn't put as many entries here as I did for the best moment. That's which everybody could go check out. That was yesterday's episode. I highly recommend it. Not as many entries, but these entries are like meteor, and there's so much to talk about. So we're not going to waste too much time. The first thing that I want to talk about when it comes to miserable moments for the Padres is the first game of the season when they lost 7-2 to the Rockies. Of course, I'm mostly joking, guys, but in all seriousness, maybe we should have known. You know what I mean? Like, that was a rough game. They lose 7-2. Bogaerts goes 3 for 4, which was great. And I think that it was just like, we were so innocent. You know what I mean? We were so innocent at that time. But no, the first thing I want to talk about is everything Manny Machado this year. And the reason why I want to talk about everything Manny Machado as being one of the worst things for this year is a lot. We could point to the Kevin Acee article talking about him, which frankly I didn't think was as critical of him as other people took it. I thought it was just kind of, a lot of multiple sources, 30 minutes of Manny on the record. I think Manny was just kind of like, I don't know. I just don't know what I think he's weird. Weird it's hard to define what Manny Machado is in the locker room, especially with, all the trouble with potentially other players and just that locker room in general for a while now. And just because he's one of the common denominators and players that's been there, I don't think it's fair to place the blame on him. And I don't think that AC article did. But for me, Manny Machado is frustrating this year because of the fact that, and this isn't something that I think is personal. I don't think that this is something that I mean to be malicious about. I'm just talking about how I felt. And I think a lot of Padres fans felt too, especially based on, in fairness, anecdotally, just a few people I've talked to that are Padres fans, which is, we've said it time and time and again, when batters get to San Diego, they either stay the same or get worse. Machado has been one of those. He stayed the same, and he was always a Hall of Fame caliber talent. He was amazing in Baltimore and all that. But I think there's something frustrating when you look at what happened this past year with players that underperformed. You look at Xander Bogaerts, who, if you go by F4, was still really effective and almost nearly as good as Ha-Seong Kim, by the way. It's just that he couldn't hit with runners in scoring position at all. And he was really inconsistent and one of the least clutch players in the entire sport. And we'll be talking about him later. But first year of a mega deal and transitioning from the American League to National League, that's happened before. Look at Francisco Lindor, right? And then now he's like a top 10 player. And he was even great in a year when the Mets were bad, right? So like that can happen sometimes. And again, still a 4.4 wins above replacement for Xander Bogaerts this year. But then you move on to other players. You look at Tatis. Yeah, his bat was disappointing. He entered a big slump this year. Couldn't hit quite the same. Even still though, right? Like still an effective player in a lot of other ways. And I don't find his bat all that disappointing because I wasn't expecting as much. And then you have, let's say, Matt Carpenter. It's like, well, maybe we should have been expecting too much from him to start. You know what I mean? Maybe we should have been going that way. Nelson Cruz, players along that line. I don't know who else was on the Padres this year. Jake Cronenworth, right? Like there was disappointing players, but they weren't quite as frustrating because it should have been a slam dunk that Manny was great this year. And Machado wasn't awful in a vacuum, by the way. Let me be very clear. This season for the Padres, I should say this last season for the Padres, 3.5 F4, which isn't terrible in a vacuum. Again, 114 WRC plus, 258, 319, 460 slash line, 30 home runs. That's not that bad. And the home run part is what I think is actually so interesting. This was so eerily reminiscent of the 2019 season when he still managed 32 home runs and a 109 WRC plus, but the defense was a little bit weird at times. He had a huge slump and the RBI totals just weren't there. I think that it's also reminiscent because of how much of a down season it was, right? He went from the 7-win season in 2018 then to a 2-win season with the Padres right as soon as he gets paid, and then he gets extended. He should be the exception to the rule because it's not like we signed him from another team. That I was just mentioning before about how people only get worse or stay the same here. Instead, he follows up what I think should have been his MVP season, 7.5 wins worth according to FanGraphs, and then a 153 WRC plus, the highest he's had with the Padres. And for you to follow that up with this year, in which he hit 30 home runs, but if I'm not mistaken, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I do believe that his home runs with people on base was something along the line of like 23 of them were solo shots and 7 of them were with runners on base, something extreme like that. And he was just horrible when we really needed him. Awful to start the season, hit into as many double plays as you can imagine. Him and Bogaerts both. And I think that's what was so frustrating is the fact that it's not like, unlike Bogaerts, he wasn't coming from another situation. It was like, you've been good for us for a few years now, and then right when you got paid, you were bad. And again, I'm not saying that he wasn't trying. I'm never going to allude to that. I don't like doing that for players. They're professionals, right? It's a hard sport, but I think that's what made him so frustrating is all of that. And then just a little bit of the yapping about how, this is also a guy who would defend Eric Hosmer, famously, even though Eric Hosmer wasn't doing much on field. And that's why no one has signed him, by the way. And then you have this year when he's like, yeah, but they're, what was it? Don't come back when we get hot. I forgot the exact quote. And then what happens? They never get hot. So that was frustrating. And then the AC article, opinions of your own about whether or not you think Machado isn't a great leader. Fine. But what is objective is that once you got extended, bad first year when it was the number one year when you can't have a bad year. And that's what happened. So everything with Machado. The next one I want to talk about is Jake Cronenworth extension. Because I think that this one was bad in the moment. I should have been harder on it. That's a miss by me. I was being optimistic because my thing was he could bounce back to what he was in 2021 and in 2020. And of course, I did not. And 2022, frankly. And I didn't. And instead, I was so excited for the season that I didn't think about how unnecessary this extension was. For a utility player that I just don't like extending utility players for that long or extending them at all. I wouldn't have done this with Ha-Seong Kim either, by the way. Seriously. If Cronenworth was extended now, I don't think I would extend Ha-Seong Kim either. I know that sounds crazy, but I don't think I would. I really, really don't. I just feel like these players, this skill set is something that is a little bit more replicable than other positions, in my opinion. Again, I know people will kill me for that, but what can I say? And instead they extend him, and now it's actively hurt the rest of what the team can do. And it's more about the fact that you could even say that Eric Hosmer, that was hey, let's show people we're legit and that we really want to be a big market that pays people what they're worth, and we're going to get someone who has a winning resume. Okay. Still a bad signing from the player perspective. For this, it's like Cronenworth had been getting worse every year, and then you extended him when you still had some arbitration years left. I don't know who you were betting against, AJ Preller. And then on top of that, you ask him now play first base. So I think the Cronenworth extension overall, probably the worst thing that happened with the Padres this year. I don't know if they can fix it. I am of the belief that trading Kim could get you a lot, including moving Cronenworth back to second and hopefully salvaging that a little bit. And hey, who knows? Maybe if he has a great year, then you can actually trade him if you want to. So that's my thing. Again, go look at his numbers in 2022. Like, yeah, the batting was not as great, but he was still worth like 4 wins because he's a good utility player and he did some things defensively. So that's just me. Cronenworth extension being there. Next one. I think this one I actually should have brought up first. Joe Musgrove's toe injury, man. That was the ultimate ominous, what's the word, omen, for this Padres season. Weight room incident, kind of like a freak incident, right, with the toe and him missing a bunch of starts. It stunk. Now, don't get me wrong, it's better than him having an injury that might affect him in the long term, especially after the extension. But it's just frustrating that, like, with such an exciting season that we're having, you know, he comes in, gets hurt. He starts 17 games this year, by the way, and it's still really good. 3.05 F4. Might have been potentially on the way to one of his best Padres seasons. He was really good, you know, with all that, even if the slight decline in strikeout rate was there, and it took him a little bit to get going. But he was just money and consistency for the few games that he did start. So this isn't like a top most miserable moment of this Padres year, but it was just annoying because I think that toe injury really marked like the we should have known. Almost similar to when Edwin Diaz got hurt. Now that was infinitely worse because he was out for the season, obviously, but similar to that, freak injury, celebrating after being Dominican Republic. Go Team Puerto Rico, of course. And then that was an omen for the Mets season. So crazy, right? Like theirs was Edwin Diaz getting hurt. Ours was Joe Musgrove getting hurt. God, the Padres and Mets both. Who was more disappointing? Seriously. You know what I mean? Might have to do that for an episode. Next moment I want to talk about really quickly is one that we already just attested to. Actually, no. I'm going to save that one, actually. I'm going to save that one. I'm going to do a quick one before break, which is Seth Lugo's start against the Dodgers. You guys might forget this one. This was back when the Padres were just starting to get things going, and they had made like a 5-run comeback the night before against the Dodgers. It was glorious. It was lovely. And I mean, it was amazing. It was amazing. And for them to have that comeback against their rival when you've been struggling, it felt like, let's get it going. And again, I'm not saying that this is when it was officially over at all. I'm just saying that this was like of course, this is when Seth Lugo has his big blow-up start. I had said that he was due for a while, and it came to fruition. The Padres were up by 5 in that game after, again, so you make a huge comeback against the Dodgers. We're turning the season around. This is what it was like watching the Padres all year. Turning the season around. 5 runs, 7-run comeback, or whatever it was the night before. And then you put a 5 spot on them to start the game. And then what happens? Lugo gets absolutely murdered. 8 runs in the very next inning after they had scored all those runs against the Dodgers. There's just something about that felt almost a little bit little microcosmic of the Padres season. Like right when you had like a good moment, zoop, ripping it out of your hands in a way that was like only the worst case scenario happened there. It's not like he came in and gave up 4 when you'd be like, dang it. It's he came up and was terrible. You know, all these other players, it's not like they hit into they hit a pop-up, to center field. It's like, no, they hit into a double play. That's what it was like watching this Padres team all year. It was. And I feel like Lugo is one microcosm of it. And I'm sure you guys might have some. Feel free to leave them in the comments because there were plenty of little moments like that all year. But ladies and gentlemen, you know what's around for you all year too? Not necessarily miserable moments of not being clutch, but being clutch in a different way. And that's FanDuel, because they're clutch when it comes to being the place that is the best place to place all of your bets. I just said the word place way too many times. Bad English there. What can I say? I'm not the best host in the world. But ladies and gentlemen, FanDuel, right now, regular season has wrapped up for the NFL, but they've still got you covered with all sorts of bets. Right now, new customers get $150. $150 when you place a $5 money line bet. Or it's just a $5 bet. My apologies. Just a $5 bet. Check that out. 150 free buckaroos. Guaranteed, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. $150 in bonus bets. Win or lose. They've got you covered, man. How do you like that? How do you like that? And on top of that, the app is really easy to use, man. I've checked it out myself. It's really great. There are many different ways to bet when it comes to live same game parlay. So it's good. You can be live in the moment. You can do that stuff. They've got you covered with real-time updates. You can find all these new bets in their Explore tab. Just help you find new areas, like helping you out kind of if you want to just say you might be interested in this thing based on this. So they got you on that. And you can make a parlay in their Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays. They've got, spreads, over-unders, Hey, maybe they'll have some MLB future bets up there soon. Ooh. Probably not immediately at the immediate vicinity, but those should be up at some point, and that'll be a lot of fun. Just hammer the over on everything Padres. Obviously, guys, you got to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And just like that, ladies and gentlemen, we are back on the Locked On Padres podcast. Ooh, we're killing it. We're killing it, ladies and gentlemen. The next one I want to talk about, we've already talked about Machado, Lugo, all those guys. The next one we need to discuss, because we've got a lot to go through still, is a little bit of a quick one. Another microcosm one for the Padres. It is the back-to-back walk-offs against them by the Giants. This, to me, personally, was when I said it's over. That's when I said it was over. Actually, no. There's 2 points I said it was over. I can't lie. It was I believe it was after they beat who was it? They beat the Rangers, I think, and then they got killed by D-backs, Giants, and then D-backs again. That was like, this is your chance to rise in the standings, and they blew it. That's when it was over. But to me, this was another microcosm moment, really bad. Bullpen mismanagement, potentially, by Bob Melvin. I would argue, what else do you want him to do? It's not his fault that Garcia came in. And again, like I mentioned before, only worst case scenario happens all year long with the Padres. That's why this was the most maddening team. It was never just, Garcia came in and gave up a home run. No, it was like Garcia came in and gave up 5 home runs and bases loaded. You know what I mean? Remember when they were going for their sweep against the Nationals? I believe it was the Nationals. Nationals or Phillies, I forgot which one. Or no, Angels, my apologies. And then they almost blew the save. You remember that? The bases loaded, it was on July 4th, I believe. That was awful, right? Like, that was the only time the worst case scenario didn't happen, but it was the case basically all year. It was super frustrating, guys. So what can I say? So that's another one. The next one I want to talk about really quickly because I actually don't think it counts. Tatis's batting slump. It wasn't great, but to me, it didn't bother me as much. I know people might be wondering why this isn't on this like official list that I've been mentioning so far. The reason why is because he was still a good player, and I wasn't expecting him to return to MVP form immediately. A lot of people gave Fangraphs crap for bringing up the article that basically said, look, coming off of this type of shoulder injury, if you look at these players, they usually are not damaged for the rest of their career, but their first year back is tough. And everyone's like, oh, well, Tatis is young. He's different. And he wasn't. Right? You know what I'm saying? Like, he wasn't different. But he did make up for it with his bat and was still a solid player. I didn't think Tatis was going to be bad this year. My thing was just, I don't think it's worth getting upset that people are like, oh, he might be a 4-win player. Still good. And I thought he was going to have a 125 WRC plus. He had 113, which wasn't great, but he was a platinum glove winner. So who cares? You know what I mean? Like, that's how good he was this year. Or how good he is in general, that this is considered a down year. Crazy stuff. So that's the Tatis, not an official one on the list, and wanted to explain why. The next one, I'm going to mention taking out a loan, only because I think that it signaled the trade for Juan Soto. That's why. I do not. I think that this thing is being overstated. I do not think that it should be talked about in a way that it means the Padres are broke now. I just think that it meant a lot for the present, and what I meant by that was they're probably going to have to get rid of Soto. I don't think that this means that this team is doomed or that they bit off more than they can chew. Guys, rich people don't go broke the same way. Trust me. One way or another, they'll be fine. They're not the first team to ever take out a loan. You could go look back at the Dodgers. You could go look at the Rangers. You could go look at the Guardians, if I'm not mistaken. Plenty of teams have taken out loans. It just gets heightened because baseball media apparatus, in my opinion, has a bias because the Padres are a team that never spends. So it's more of a story to say, oh, look, see, they spent and they didn't have it. You know what I mean? Because we need to discourage the teams that are actually trying and hype up the Brewers and the Rays who don't spend and never win. Anyway, not to get too much on my soapbox there. Speaking of the trade, the Juan Soto trade, one of the worst moments of the Padres this year. It was the culmination of failure. It was the culmination of poor roster construction. It was the culmination of every single bad thing happening this year. And if they had just made the playoffs, maybe this doesn't happen. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. If they weren't disastrously bad. Because, hey, maybe the playoff revenue would have swayed people to be like, oh, you know what? We could keep it for one more year. I do not think the Juan Soto trade itself was bad. I don't. I actually thought that they got a lot of good. I just think, objectively speaking, it was a miserable moment. To have traded everything of your farm, to have a guy who was also great, by the way, who's an awesome player this year. Really, really frustrating. So what I'm talking about is what it was miserable that we got to this point, not the literal actual trade in a vacuum. It's that we got to this point. It's crazy. But considering they did get to this point, I actually thought they had a pretty decent return. I really do. I'm excited about Drew Thorpe. I'm excited about Michael King. Burrito and Vasquez could potentially fill innings. I think it's good to have that depth with those two. I don't think it's a bad move, all things considered. But getting there is what was the bad moment. Next one I want to talk about. Oh man, we've only got a couple more left. Let's talk about a little bit of a dirty one, and that's Xander Bogaerts' runners in scoring position this year. Again, I mentioned this before. I think unlike Machado, I still think Bogaerts, his season is, I don't want to say it's underrated, but it is worth bringing up. You know, it's hard to transition over, which is why it wasn't as frustrating as Manny's. But my God, runners in scoring position this year, Xander Bogaerts, 192, 310, 340 slash line. Diving deeper, with runners on first and second, he hit below 100, 93. With first and third, he hit 167. With the bases loaded, he hit 71, as in .071. He was the 24th worst player in Major League Baseball this year with runners in scoring position, at least by batting average. He was 98th with runners in scoring position, WRC plus wise, but that doesn't excuse his role and the fact that he was in the top of the lineup and he should have been driving people in and not just getting walks. You know what I mean? Like, that's not what he was. It's not like this guy was a streaky home run hitter. His thing was bat to ball, rips doubles, gets you some extra base hits, and that's it, right? But instead he didn't do that. In high leverage situations, if you don't want to use the WRC plus, he had a 24, or I'm sorry, if you don't want to just use runners in scoring position, in high leverage situations this year, 24 WRC plus. 24. Yeah, that's how bad it was. To give some context, by the way, another reason why you don't only want to use runners in scoring position numbers, Ha-Seong Kim struggled at times too with runners in scoring position, but he made up for it with the fact that he did well in high leverage situations, 129 WRC plus for him on the season. So that basically almost means like top of the second inning with a runner on second base, maybe Kim wasn't very good there. You know what I'm saying? But like bottom seven, you're down by 2, he would get that hit for you. You know what I mean? When it was more of a high leverage situation. So it wasn't just strictly runners in scoring position. So that's just to give you a little bit of a comparison. That's how bad Bogaerts was this year. If he wasn't this bad with runners on base, it's an awesome season because the other numbers, his okay defense, the fact that he still hit for a decent amount of power, the fact that he was able to take pitches and get on base, all that stuff. He was still okay. 4.4 F4, like I said. If he just drives and runs, my God. But yeah, the fact that Gary Sanchez almost had more RBIs than him despite playing in like 70 less games than him, basically all I need to say. There's 2 more that we have here. 2 more. One of them is more recent. The other one was at the end of the season. Let's talk about the more recent one. That's the Dodgers signing everyone. Let's just be honest, guys. I know it's a Padres podcast, but let's be real. What was one of the most miserable things about being a Padres fan this last year? It's the Dodgers signing everyone. It's them signing Ohtani and Glasnow and Teoscar Hernandez. In fairness, that happened this past week. Glasnow, Ohtani. What was the other one? I'm blanking right now. Yoshinobu Yamamoto. It's all of that. It's having to be a Padres fan, sit and watch the baseball sports media apparatus, praise and say how good this is for baseball, that, hey, yet again, one of the same 5 teams historically that has a lot of money and gets the star players has once again got another the star player, as if that's really all that interesting when you're a baseball fan. Not for ratings. For ratings, it'll be great. And it is better than the Angels. I will say that. It's better because at least we get to see him in the postseason. And admittedly, I think that will be kind of fun. But is it that cool of a story that it's the Dodgers? No, it's not. And anyone telling you otherwise is kidding themselves or is a Dodgers fan. So that really stunk. And I do think it is worth pointing out, while I do understand why you could say, hey, look, like, you guys haven't spent that much historically. We don't necessarily love it as much for you to make this long-term of a commitment. But the fact that Aaron Judge was offered apparently like 14 years, 440 by the Padres, obscene level contract, and reports that they would have declined that, but they're okay with being like, no, but the Dodgers will figure it out. I imagine that there's more levels to that, and saying baseball's like, you know what, we might have to help out the Padres, and we'd prefer if the Dodgers because there's less of a possibility we'd have to give more money to them. Sure, but again, in all, it still reaches the same conclusion, which is that you don't like that the Padres is a small market team, that you might have to help them out. You know what I mean? Oh, well, Javi, look how much money they spent this year. This would have happened before, if this Judge contract happened. This would have been before the Manny extension, before the Darvish extension, before the Cronenworth extension, and before the Xander Bogaerts signing. All in all, it's still $30 million a year, guys. Like, that would have been nuts, but they gave up infinitely more altogether for all those other players. And baseball would have said, apparently, no. Keep that in mind. Just keep that in mind. And the last thing I want to talk about, the last microcosm mini moment of the season, was Josh Hader apparently just refusing to go 4 outs, and then Bob Melvin's subsequent interview after the game, in which you could go look it up. It was crazy. It might even be on YouTube. I forgot. But Bob Melvin being asked, why didn't you use Josh Hader there? And him being like, that's what we're doing now. To paraphrase, that's what we're doing now. That's how it is. I.e., decisions out of my hands. Whether that is a shot at Preller or a shot at Hader or both, whatever, bottom line is dysfunction, and well-run machines and organizations do not have moments like that, which is why I don't want to say campaigning, but why I was like, yeah, I do think that they should move on from Preller. They aren't, but this is where we are. That moment just summed up so much about the clubhouse, the chemistry, and everything that was happening. And man, oh man, was it annoying. And it was just like, just terrible season, guys. So again, let's go through the list of, in my opinion, the worst things in Padres baseball for the last year. Number 1, everything Manny Machado, the disappointment following the extension. The fact that you had to trade Juan Soto, and that moment and that day was pretty rough. Jake Cronenworth being extended for no reason, despite the fact that I'm sure they were competing against nobody, and he still had arbitration, all of that. Hader's no-show and the Bob Melvin interview. Joe Musgrove's toe injury right before the season started. Xander Bogaerts' numbers with runners in scoring position. The team taking out a loan because it basically signaled the end of the Juan Soto era. The Dodgers signing everyone and seeing how the hypocrisy around them signing everyone opposed to the Padres. The Giants back-to-back walk-off losses, because to me that was like one of the oh my god moments, and was another, that's why they didn't go big at the deadline. I was like, moments like that, if you watch the team, just really awful stuff, poor bullpen management, disaster class, and then Lugo's awful start against the Dodgers that I alluded to earlier, because that one was also a little bit microcosmic of the season as a whole. Only the worst things possible happened for how talented this roster was. I say all of this, guys, as a release and the final goodbye to last year in Padres baseball, a season that I cannot wait to forget as soon as possible. I wish I could Men in Black myself with the laser thing. I really do. It was terrible. It was tough for me, frankly, covering this team at times, just because I was like, how many times can I say this is awful in a way that's engaging for listeners and viewers? It was tough, man. But bottom line is we got through it, and I really am optimistic for this next year. Remember, looked like, hellscape, apocalyptic, Dante's Inferno, pits of Tartarus, whatever, after the 2021 season. Then 2022 happened, and they were great, made the NLCS. So I kind of like being counted out. I don't know about you, but I think that could be a good thing. So hopefully they learn from these mistakes. Hopefully we as fans learn from these mistakes as well. And that's it. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. With that all being said, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves. Remember to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. In terms of the future of the show, tomorrow, going to be talking with Nick Lee of the East Village Times and Padres Twitter frequenter. Going to be talking about grading the Padres offseason so far. That should be a lot of fun, giving letter grades for all the moves that they have made. That should be fun. Excited to hear his perspective as well. And then for next week, we're going to be talking about New Year's resolutions for the Padres. I know I'm a little bit late, whatever. Sorry, guys. It was a bad week for me. I'm sorry. We're going to be talking about that. Going to be talking about all sorts of fun stuff. And of course, recapping whatever major moves happen. I actually just saw some report that the Yankees offered Snell something, so maybe that signing is going to come soon. Lots of fun stuff for sure. And I can't wait to talk about it with all of you. So that should be a lot of fun. Until next time, stay safe, and of course, stay faithful. My Fire Faithful homies, take care.